So we are going to be starting from the very first part, and this time we are going to build the REST API so that we'll be able to get some items, we'll be able to insert an item, make an update, and also delete an item. Actually, we have some fake REST API. For instance, if we go to fake REST API, we can actually get a list of items. But the problem with this is that in this case of this list here, you cannot actually insert anything or delete or update. So that's why let's build our own so that we can actually return a list of items and do everything we would like to do. So let's build this API. This API will be built in Spring Boot, and it's going to be easy, step by step. Although all the steps for this particular API is not here, but it's very easy. We are going to do it together now because this is an Angular UI tutorial, but we just need an API for us to have data, okay? So it's a step-by-step. So let's follow the instruction. I'm going to simply create a new project. And please, if you are joining for the first time, subscribe to my channel because there is a beginner lesson. All the steps are there for you. After now, all the steps are there in my website here in this page. So simply start a new project in IntelliJ and go to next. And I'm going to say com.kindson-legenius. And I'm going to call it friends API. So because I want to store lists of my friends, lists of my subscribers like you, so that I can insert, update, edit, and delete from Angular UI. So I'm going to call it friends API, and let's just call it let's call it here friends API. Okay, so this is fine. I'm going to go next. So in terms of dependencies, there are a number of dependencies you need to use. For instance, here we have JPA, we have web, and we have the H2 dependencies. These are the 3 dependencies mandatory. I also need Lombok. Lombok makes coding a bit easier. So let me use Lombok, and also so let me look for JPA. JPA. I also need web. And I also need H2 because I want to store the database in memory so that the system will be fast. But if you want to use MySQL, it's okay. So I'm going to say H2 database, and this is fine. So go next, and I want to store this in friends API. That should be fine. Okay, so finish. So after having this project created, the next thing you want to do, let me just move this window here. The next thing you want to do is to create 4 different files, okay? So let me just tell you the 4 different files you have to create. The first file you want to create is the model. Just say, call it friends. So this is friends, like the object that has to be stored, like a friend record, okay? So go to src main and go to src main Java, open here. I'm not creating any packages. I'm going to just create all these files. So let me call this friend, okay? So I'd like to have, okay, let me just take out this. Just close this to make room. So let me also shift this out a bit and then increase the font size a bit. So we're also going to annotate this with our data annotation. Also, data annotation comes from Lombok, so we just say import class. We're going to say at no as constructor at entity annotation as well. And then, why do we have this error? Add an ID attribute. Okay, fine. So now we have private integer ID. Okay. Now I want to make this ID to be primary key, so we are going to say at ID annotation, and I also want to make this primary key to be auto increment. So to do that, you simply say at generated value and simply specify the strategy is equal to generation type, that identity, like this. Okay. So once you do this field will be auto increment field. That's the ID field. So my friends will also have, wait, give me a sec. Let's take out this. They will also have a first name, last name, email, country, and so let's say private string first name, private string last name, okay, and private string, let's say department, okay, department. For me, it's computer science or programming or something, but I'm going to do that later. I'm going to fill up the data a bit later. So I'm going to say private string email, and finally private string country. Okay, so the country of origin of the person. So this is what we need to do to set up the model. We've set up the POJO. This is the data that's going to be stored in our database. And now let's go to the next part. I'm going to create another file called the service. So I'm going to call it friend service. So this is the service layer. Okay, so this friend service. So this is not compulsory, but I think it's necessary to have a service. So I'm going to explain it a little more as we go. So annotate with that service. So what it means is data coming, request coming from the UI is going to pass through the service layer. So the service layer is like a middle layer that connects between the UI and the database. Okay, so you don't go directly to the database, but you go through the UI that provides all these functions for you. All right, so the next file we want to create is the interface to the data. Okay, so I'm going to call it friend repository. So repository is always an interface to the database. Repository. So a repository actually helps you to have automatically have CRUD operations like get, post, put, and delete. These are written automatically for you, so you don't have to do any much work by using an interface. And select interface from here and say okay. Now this friend repository, let me just increase the font a bit, is going to extend JPA repository. So just say extends JPA repository. You also need to specify the data you want to store. The data I want to store is friends, all right? And I have friends already created as a POJO. So I'm going to specify a friend. That's what I want to store. I want to store friend records. And it also requires that you specify the primary key type. Okay, the primary key type, is it an integer primary key or string primary key? In this case, it's an integer primary key. So specify it. And if you are creating a repository, always annotate the repository with @repository annotation. So I think this is very, very easy. So creating an API is very easy, and we're almost complete. We're almost done with this. The next thing I would like to create, finally, is there are about one thing that I need to create, one more, is the controller file that will have the controller endpoint. So I'm going to say friend controller. Okay, so a controller has to be annotated with controller annotation, @rest controller annotation. Now we need methods, methods like get, post, put, and delete. We are going to write it in the controller here. So we want when the user goes to get, let's first write a method that returns a list of items. So I'm going to say at get mapping, if the user goes to /friends, he'll get a list of friends. Okay, so I'm going to say public lists of friends, okay, get friends. Okay, now, all right, let's import the list class here. Okay, java.util.list. Now we say that controller have to pass through the service. So actually all the functions get, post, put, and delete has to be in the service so that the controller will get them or pass through the service. So let's go to the friend service. So I'm going to go to friend service. I'm going to just write the 4 functions we need. So I'm going to say public get friends. Okay, so let me just write the other one as well. Public add friend, and the next one says public update friend, And finally, we should have public delete friend. I think this is quite easy. Public delete friend, okay? Now, if you are deleting a friend, we need the ID of the friend to delete. So we need an ID. So integer ID, okay? In lowercase. If we are updating a friend, we need the friend record that we want to update. Okay, so it's going to be friend. Okay, this is it. Okay, this is fine. If we are going to add a friend, we also need the friends or the friend object, or the friend object we want to add. So we also will have to say friend here as well. Okay, let me increase the font a bit. Okay, so what makes up the body of this request? So for get friend is very easy. Simply say repository.find all. But for us to use the repository in the service, we need to auto-wire the repository into the service. So to do that, you simply say auto-wired and say private. We called it friend repository, friend repository. Okay, so we've auto-wired this repository into the service so that they can communicate. So here I'm simply going to say return friend repository dot find all. Okay, that's all. That's what you should do. Oh, sorry. So here we need is going to return a list of friends. Okay. So let's just correct this. Hope you understand how it goes. So it's going to return a list of friends. So in this case, this is going to be void. When you are adding, you are not returning anything. It's going to be void. When you're also deleting, updating and deleting, is going to be void. You are not returning anything. And we're also going to have void here. So in this case, we have repository.save and specify the data you want to save. In this case, we want to save this friend. And update is simply the same thing as repository.save as well. So the same method for save and update is what the repository uses. So save friend. And finally, we want to delete, let me put a semicolon here. And finally, when we want to delete, we also need repository.delete. So in this case, we can try to see if we have delete by ID and specify the ID of the record we want to delete. Make no mistake about it. All right, so here the service is done. And now let's go to the controller. And the controller, we also need to wire the service into the controller. So it moves from controller to service, service to repository. So as we wire the repository into the service, we are going to wire the service into the controller. And this way there is a communication from a REST controller to service to repository. That's what is called a three-layer architecture. So I'm going to say at auto-wired, I'm going to say private friend service, okay. So this service now will expose all the functions that we wrote so that we don't have to write it again. For get mapping, we have service dot, I think we have service dot get friend. So that is it. It's as simple as that. And why do we have this error here? Okay, public missing return statement. Okay, so let's say return. Okay, perfect. So let's when we want to post a new friend, we are going to say at post mapping this time. At post mapping, what we want to happen is when the user goes to friends / add new. So if you make a post request to this add new URL, he'll be able to add a new friend into the database. All right, so the name of the function is going to be public. This is what's happening. Okay, I understand exactly where this problem is coming from. Okay, so it's actually going to be at post mapping. So all the mapping is going to be at. Okay. All right, so okay. So I'm going to say public void add friend, maybe void add friend, and we need the friend we are going to add. Now the friend is going to be friend, so it's going to be parameter friend, and we are going to simply say when we are adding a friend, there is no return statement, so we are going to simply say service.add friend. I'm going to specify the friend, but where is this friend coming from? Okay, this friend is going to be sent from the URL. Sorry, it's going to be signed with the request coming. It's going to come as the body of the request. Normally, a body of a request is whatever is filled in the form goes as a body of the request. So when we are going to be working with Angular UI, we are going to fill a form and submit, and it's going to come into the body of the request. So to tell Spring API that this request is coming from the body, you simply say @request body. That's all. That's what you need to say here. So this is about add new. So let's go to update. So I'm going to say add update mapping. I think I should have update mapping. Oh, sorry, add put mapping. Okay. So when the user goes to /friends, okay, we select a friend. Let's say ID. So this particular friend now we want to edit. So if we go to this URL, we'll be able to edit this friend record, but that ID that is specified in curly braces has to be provided plain, like a number has to be there. So that's a placeholder for you have to replace it when you send this request. I'm going to be explaining more on this later on. So we are going to have public void update friend, public void update friend. And now this ID here is coming from, is going to be coming as a request parameter. So a request parameter or path variable. Path variable is a variable specified in the URL path, right? So if you have this URL in the address bar, for instance, we have this path here. There's a URL there. A variable that is called a path variable. Okay, so in this case we have friend/friend/id/edit. That variable ID there is a path variable. So I'm going to say path variable of the name of the name of this variable is ID, and it's going to be an integer, and it's going to be ID. Now when you are doing an update, you need the ID of the record to update, and also the modifications that has been made. The modifications that has been made is coming as the body of the form as well. So it's going to be at request body friend. So basically the same thing we post, except that in this case now we need the path variable to contain the ID of the friend to update. All right. So let's write this. Let me just make additional room here. So simply say service dot update friend and specify the friend. Okay. In this case, you don't need to pass the ID as a parameter. So Spring will simply figure out that since you provided the ID and the path variable, it will know the particular record to update. Okay. And finally, we need delete. So I'm going to say delete mapping and specify basically I think it should be about the same, close to the same like edit. So I'm going to say /friends the ID and delete. So here we don't need a request body, simply specify the ID and it simply deletes the record. We are not modifying anything, simply delete it. So we don't need any request body here. And I'm simply going to say public void. When you are deleting, you don't return anything, so it's a void function. Deletes friend, and it's going to be coming from the path variable, that is the ID. It's going to be integer ID. Okay. All right. So here we go. And finally, we are going to say service dot delete friend ID. Okay, so this is how to build an API. We built our API, everything is perfectly okay. We've not tested it, but one more thing I would like to let you know. Since we are going to be accessing this API from the Angular UI, we need to tell this API to allow something coming from an external server to be able to access. So to do that, you simply say at cross origin at this point. So in this way, when something is coming from a different server, which is Angular in this case, running in a different port, it will be able to access this API. And finally, we need to add some demo data. Okay, we need to add some test data so that we'll be able to test the API. To be able to add some test data, simply write a few insert statements, SQL insert statements in a file called, just call it data.sql. Now you can't change the name. It has to be data.sql. Don't change it to any other thing. If you change it and use another name, it's not going to work. The name have to be data.sql so that when the system runs, the database is going to be initialized using this insert statement. They are going to run and insert data into the database initially. Now I'm going to, instead of writing all these statements one after the other, I'm going to paste it from my clipboard because I've written this SQL statement. So I'm inserting 6 records of different friends of mine, including you. So please subscribe to my channel so that I know you are my friend and I can always write something and you know, this kind of motivates me to know that I have friends who are working with me or who are learning. If you have any question, also let me know. All right, so when this application starts up, it's going to execute this SQL statement. So I'm going to say file save all. There is one more thing we need to do, and that thing is we need to add the configuration for H2 database because we need to connect with H2 database. H2 database is an in-memory database, so we don't need to install the server. It's going to be saved in memory. So here in my website as well. So simply copy the configuration for H2 database and paste it in your application.properties file. So simply go to application.properties file here and paste the configuration. Now the name of the database is called FriendDB. You can change it to anything. I'm calling it FriendsDB because I'm storing the details of my friends. And now we are saying that also we are going to run this the API on port 9001. So I'm going to simply come to this place and say server.port equal to 9001, and that should be okay. What else is left? Our API is on. I'm going to simply test it by running this application at this point. So I'm going to simply run it. After that, we are done with everything about the API. We focus on the UI because that's what is a bit more challenging than the API. So I'm going to simply click on start at this point. So I'm going to click on start. On this application, this API is going to run on port 9001. And hopefully I don't want to see any error. It's perfectly. So it started well. So let's go to port 9001 and see if our API is working. So I'm going to go to, at this point, HTTP localhost at port 9001/friends. Oh, 9001/friends. So let's see where the error is coming from. Okay, so let's just troubleshoot a little bit. So we have our data.sql is okay. Application.properties is okay. Server.port is 9001. Friends repository is okay, and this controller /friends. Okay, you can see a typo here. You can see, let me just enlarge it so that you can see where the typo is. So you can see I made a mistake here. So I'm going to simply correct it, friends. All right. So I'm going to stop this app and also rerun it again. So let me just rerun again, and hopefully it should work at this time. Normally they say if you write even the best of programs, the first time you run it, there might be an error, and that's what just happened. It's not a problem. If it happens to you, no problem. The key thing is for you to learn how to debug your application. Now if I come here and refresh the page, you can see now I have a list of friends displayed here. As you can see, all these friends have been displayed. Now, just in case you are curious, you want to see how the H2 database looks like, you can simply go to the same port and go to H2 console, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, yeah, fine. So H2 console, simply change the name of the database here to frienddb. I think this is the name of the database. I'm going to click on connect. Is it friendsdb or frienddb? So let me just go to check. Friendsdb. Okay, so let's just copy the URL instead of trying to guess. Let me copy the URL. Just paste it right here. Command V. All right. So I'm going to connect. At this point, I hope it connects, and you can see that we have the friends database here. If I run it, you can see we have all the friends we inserted right here. We have me, Kindson, Mila, Helen, Shama, Oma. So we built our API, and this is the starting point. We've come this far. Congrats, you've done so well. The nice part will now be, remember we have all the step-by-step here in my website, and we can now move on to the nice part, set up the Angular app. So I'd like to thank you for viewing. Remember to subscribe to my channel. If you have problems, let me know in the comment box below. Or maybe share this video around so that we can have more people who are learning programming. And I'd like to see you in the next part.